Hope you guys are doing well on this Friday. I am Stephen Ray, and we're going to be talking about Tennessee. Right back here, as you can see, I've got my Tennessee sign back here. We're going to be joined by, off the top, by Wes Rucker to get the latest information on the Tennessee situation, especially with them hiring a brand new AD. And then later on in the show, we're also going to talk about the Pac-12 situation with Larry Scott being dismissed on Wednesday. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we get you guys ready for an exciting show only on the Stingray Show. The Dogs and Stingray are coming for you! This is Stephen Ray, a.k.a. Stingray, coming to you live from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Good afternoon, Mr. Feinbaum. Stingray here, and I'm about to shoot the bull with you like all the Auburn students do down at Auburn. Worst defense ever! So without further ado, here is the biggest Alabama Stadium. Are you kidding me? My God Almighty! What an epic way for the Tennessee-Georgia rivalry to end this game! What a play! Wow! Welcome inside another exciting edition of the Stingray Show, everybody. I am your host, Stephen Ray, and we're going to be talking a lot of Tennessee. So without further ado, let me go ahead and pull up my co-host, Heath. Heath, how's it going, my friend, on this Friday?
Stephen, it's a fried bologna Friday. How are you, brother? I'm
doing good, sir. And without further ado, let's not keep our guest waiting. Let's go on ahead and bring on Wes Rucker, who is live there in Knoxville with the latest information on the Tennessee situation. Wes, how are you doing? And thank you so much for joining us.
Doing all right, guys. A little bit tired this week. It's been quite a long week in Knoxville.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of those recently. This has been one of them, certainly, but chugging along. Still a lot of work to do.
Well, Wes, let's hit the ground running. Let's get started. What were your thoughts about the new athletic director hire? Are you happy? Is it going to be well received by the Tennessee fan base?
I think it's been pretty well received. I think this is a guy who is one of the young up-and-comers in the business. And if you want some perspective, Tennessee's paying him $1.8 million per year, which is a big figure. I believe one of the top 5 paid ADs in the country now. Wow. And he was a guy who was already making – 1.1 at UCF. UCF paid him more than Florida State, Florida, and Miami paid their athletic directors.
Wow.
So this is a guy who comes from a long, distinguished family. Obviously, his father was the athletic director at Arizona State, Notre Dame, and Duke. His brother Mike is the basketball coach at Florida. Another one of his brothers is in I believe at Tulane, and another one of his 2 sisters is an assistant athletic director down at SMU. So this is a kind of first family of college administration, and Tennessee feels pretty good about this hire. And I think honestly they probably should. I mean, proof will be in the pudding, but this is a guy who has had chances to leave UCF before. He's built a really strong, really strong situation down there. He was a Buffalo before that. And, he's done nothing but hire really good coaches. He hired Nate Oates at Buffalo as the basketball coach. And obviously Alabama would tell you they're pretty happy with him right now.
Yeah.
He hired he hired Leopold, who's got Buffalo in the top 25 this year in football. He hired Scott Frost down at UCF. That worked out really well. He's hired Josh Heupel, who's done fine down there. I believe he hired Johnny Dawkins at UCF to coach basketball. So he's built some pretty good programs out of nothing before, and now he's coming to a Tennessee program that's, I wouldn't say obviously nothing right now. I mean, Tennessee's obviously doesn't look like Tennessee right now, But Tennessee's got a lot of upside, and he's a guy who thinks he can help them get there.
And if I'm not mistaken, to follow up on that, White, this is not his first stop in the SEC. I believe he was an associate AD at Ole Miss down in Oxford, where his brother played basketball.
Yes, and he actually played basketball at Notre Dame before he left. He said he was more of a student than a student athlete, but he's a guy who he does know this league. Certainly, his family now is kind of a lot of them are based in Florida. That's where he was. That's where his brother was, and he's been at Ole Miss before. He knows this league, and I think he's a guy who. I don't think this situation will feel too big for him. I think he's a pretty confident guy, very confident guy. But that's not such a bad thing at this business.
I want to make a bad joke. Feel free to laugh at me.
Sure.
Or with me. If Tennessee goes undefeated and the national media doesn't claim a national championship for the Volunteers, which I don't see that happening, well, there'll be a parade at Dollywood instead of Disney World claiming their national championship parade. I noticed that UCF, they did that with football a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's been kind of a fun joke the past couple of days. We've been talking about, what's going on if you've got like a self-declared national champion versus a champion of life with Butch Jones. I mean, it's a little bit, they're declaring themselves champions of a lot of things now. But, I think this is a guy who is clearly very good at promoting his not just himself, but the athletic departments and the teams.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's a guy who, think about what UCF was 5 years ago or so when he got there. I mean, did anybody even know the nickname of the school, what colors they wore? Now people know those things, and I think he's a big part of the reason for that. He'd tell you he's not the only reason for it, but I think they built something pretty special there out of really nothing, and they've done a nice job. And I think he's a pretty good hire for Tennessee, considering the situation Tennessee is in right now. I don't know how you can be unhappy about it.
Right.
Are you surprised, and I'm sure you get this question a lot, but are you surprised at how far and how fast this season went from really good to the situation we're in now? Because at the start of the year, I think Tennessee last season had about an 8-game win streak, and now here we sit with a new coach and a new AD.
It's certainly a surprise. There's no question about it. I did not know exactly what to expect this season. Everybody had to deal with COVID. There's no question, like everyone had to deal with COVID. But Tennessee had it pretty bad there for a while. Tennessee had just not a very good preseason camp. There were so many guys out of the lineup. There were so many guys who didn't get much practice. And I think they really just never really recovered. They got going okay early on. They won a couple of games, but you could see then that they still weren't playing as well as they should have been playing, frankly. But then, they're still leading Georgia there at the half. You're feeling pretty good. And then the whole thing just kind of fell apart, and it fell apart fast. And then by the end of the season, you had people within the department making complaints about some potential allegations. It got ugly pretty quick. I can't say I'm shocked because I've seen things get ugly here before.
Right.
I think one thing people don't really think about when they think about the Tennessee football or Tennessee athletics department in general is that Knoxville is a much bigger place than I think a lot of people think that it is. Knoxville's got a metro area of 1 million people.
Yes.
And other than Nashville, probably the biggest, it's the biggest town in the league. And Nashville is clearly not a Vandy town. It's a Vols and Titans and, Predators town.
Right.
And so when things go wrong at Tennessee, you've basically got a college, like a pro-sized city almost, without a pro team. So you've got a ton of media, a ton of be in trouble. And I think that a lot of people who have come to Tennessee recently have not considered that. They've not considered exactly what the blowback is like when things don't go well. And I think they've learned that the hard way. You would hope that a guy like Danny White with his family background would have an understanding of that. And you would hope that the head coach that they hire will have really thick skin and understand that, because when things don't go well here, you're talking about a program that hasn't won at a high level in 13 years or so. I mean, and a lot of people in Alabama can remember what it was like there for about a decade when Bama wasn't very good. Still won an Orange Bowl in that time, had one SEC West title, I think, did some nice things, but in general, there were a lot of 500 type seasons and just so much frustration, a lot of anger. Tennessee has been on that tear plus a few more years. And that just, losing is a sickness. It's like a virus. It spreads and it makes you crazy, makes you angry. And there's a lot of hostility built up here because these people have still not gotten used to and will not accept mediocrity. And so when they see it, bad things are going to happen. That doesn't always mean someone's going to go snitch on you for a recruiting violation necessarily. But, I mean, those kind of things, it gets ugly here. And, you could say if you're an optimist that there's a lot to spin there, that if you are winning, you're the king of the world, basically, you're a king in a town. But when things go bad here, they really go bad. And it gets toxic quickly, it gets hostile quickly, and these people are just tired of losing.
Wes, you talk about things getting very ugly, and you've seen things get ugly before. For the folks that are not as familiar with the Tennessee program like you are, talk about some of those ugly moments over the past decade that you've seen rise up in the athletic department, and just kind of give us a little snippet of each kind of instance that you've seen over the years, so people can understand the pain and the frustration that Tennessee fans are going through right now. Man,
where to begin? It's a you could write like a War and Peace size book, like the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. You could write books that long, about everything that's gone wrong here. Obviously,
how about this? Let's start with Philip Fulmer being asked to leave as head coach and that whole situation. Because I remember I'm a big college baseball guy, and I was heartbroken when Delmonico was asked to leave Tennessee. I never understood that reasoning of letting him go, because he was going to Omaha about every 4 or 5 years. But the same AD asked Fulmer to go, and that was not the best situation of how it ended. Start there with that athletic administration, and we'll kind of move forward from that moment on.
Sure. I think that, for 30 years, Tennessee had basically the same people in charge of things. You felt like, you walked around that program, and sure, men's basketball was up and down, had some years where it could have been better. But in general, you had, Papa Bear, who was Philip Fulmer. Right. You had Mama Bear, who was Pat Summitt. And then you had the grandpa, who was Doug Dickey. And you had that sort of that trio of people. And there's an army of people behind the scenes. But in general, you had those three people running the show. And a lot of the associates, a lot of the assistant coaches in sports, they all knew each other. And when you walked in the building, you kind of knew everyone. And you knew who they were. You might have even known their spouses, their kids' names. You knew what their job was. If you needed to get a hold of them, you could. It just kind of felt like everybody knew everybody, and things ran not always smoothly, but for the most part, you kind of knew. And before that, Tennessee had Johnny Majors for, 13, 14, however many years it was. So you had 30 years with 2 football coaches and a lot of the same staffers and a lot of the same people behind the scenes, like the administrators, equipment people, all the, academic people. And so Philip Fulmer getting moved aside, which, almost happened a couple times before, but then when it really happened, you really I was at that press conference, and I don't know that I've ever seen players more distraught than they were that day, because he was a father figure for a lot of them. And it was, you had guys in tears. You had a player come to the press conference and angrily ask a question like he was a reporter. I mean, it was just kind of madness. And it felt like, I don't want to use this word, especially when, we got things going on beyond sports right now that are so much bigger than that with COVID, 400,000, everybody tested has been, but it felt like a funeral. It really did that day. And it was just a terribly emotional situation. And then you bring in Lane Kiffin, and then he makes everybody feel good. He's like, hey, we're going to go out there and beat Florida's what, and here we go. Bruce Pearl's in charge of basketball. They got it going on. They're talking smack. They're winning. Everybody feels good. Well, then Lane Kiffin leaves. And out of nowhere, takes the one job he would have taken, which was going back to USC, going back home, so to speak. And there was chaos that night, just chaos. Lots and lots of, students burning mattresses outside. You had, just a crazy press conference. It was like a little small riot. It was nuts. I think some people overplay it, but it was crazy. It was something you don't see very often. And then you had the Dooley years, which, never came to fruition. A lot of frustration then. Then you bring in Butch Jones, and he tries to get everybody back feeling good again, but then because he was, Dooley was the straight talker. And then Butch comes in, and he's like the sunshine pumper. But then people realize Butch only has like one speed, and he will not ever admit that anything is wrong, ever, for any reason, and will just lie when he doesn't have to. And so then you have a situation. And again, I people say all the time, like, why do you go after Butch Jones? I'm just speaking the truth. I'm not. It's not a personal thing. I'm just telling you that he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because he would never admit, the sky's blue out there. You just gotta, your grass is green. You gotta say what something is. And so, then you bring in Pruitt, and it's still not working. You had in men's basketball, you had the petition to get rid of Conzo Martin. Then you had Donnie Tyndall come in and kind of torch the place and have some recruiting violations from his time at Southern Miss. The women's basketball program, Pat Summitt passes away. It's awful. And then a new coach comes in, and Holly just doesn't. She was Pat's right-hand woman, but she never really got it going. There's just been a lot of bad for the past dozen years here. And I'm not saying there's not been moments. Rick Barnes has done a fantastic job as basketball coach. Those guys, I know they had a really bad game Tuesday, but that's a potential Final Four team. And they got a baseball coach, Vitello, who's doing a great job. Those guys are on the cusp of doing something really good there, especially if they can keep a couple of these kids from the past class in the draft, out of the draft, that they're going to be okay. And it's frustrating for them last year because they had an ace who ended up going in the first round of the White Sox and pitched for the White Sox in the playoffs, and like the year he was drafted. So they were like, man, we had something going there. We had a 6'6" lefty throwing 103, and now he's gone, and that sucks for them. But there's just been a lot of frustration. Bama has become an empire in football, and that's Tennessee's blood rival, so that's not fun. Kentucky's won some titles in basketball. That's the other blood rival. It's just been – I mean, they've even lost to Vandy a few times in football. It's just been in Kentucky too, which hadn't happened in 30 years. And it's just been a lot of – when people say where do these frustration – where does this hostility, toxicity come from? Did you just listen to the past 10 minutes? I mean, there are reasons for it. Now, does it get out of hand? Yes. Does it get too personal with some people? Yes. But the reason for hostility is pretty obvious because Tennessee for a long time has made it look like Tennessee doesn't know what Tennessee is doing. And that drives people crazy. I mean, Tennessee's fan base is one of the largest ones around. It's not happy. And frankly, it shouldn't be happy. Now, they're in a situation now where they got to have some patience, and they're not going to do that very well, probably. But I understand. I mean, Vol Twitter can hate me, and a lot of them do, but I have always said I understand where the frustration comes from. I just think the way it's channeled sometimes is it could be better. But there's a lot of frustration for a lot of reason, and people saying it's just out of nowhere. And no. People, look at what's gone on for the past 13, 14 years. These people are angry for a reason.
Well, you talked about the right person for the job. There was a report that came out yesterday and this morning that Tennessee actually reached out to the SEC to ask them about head coach Hugh Freeze. What are you hearing on that front? And do you think Tennessee would potentially reach out to Coach Freeze?
I do not see it happening. I just don't. I think Tennessee, and this is no knock on Hugh Freeze whatsoever. I've interviewed the guy a few times. I don't really know him. We all have mistakes. I wouldn't want people, if I had the lowest moments of my personal life, I certainly wouldn't want out there for the public to see. I mean, it's life. It's tough, and these people are public people, and it's part of the trade. But you look at the way things ended at Ole Miss, how much of that was or was not his fault. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but it doesn't necessarily matter when you've got a situation where you are replacing a coach who has been terminated, they say, for cause. We'll see about that, because he's had a lot of NCAA recruiting violations. How can you tell the NCAA and the SEC, we're cleaning this up when you hire Hugh Freeze? That just doesn't add up. And so Tennessee has used the word integrity probably 24 times in the 2 press conferences this week. That's just a guess. I think they've talked for about an hour, and I think they've said it certainly more than 20 times, that exact word. And I'm not saying Hugh Freeze does or doesn't have integrity. That's not, I don't know that. I wouldn't be able to. There are people who could give you a better answer than I could to that question. But I just don't see how Tennessee goes down that road. Nothing shocks me because it's Tennessee. So, by God, you never know. But that would be crazy. Someone like Lane Kiffin I could see before I could see Hugh Freeze.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to go with next. I don't see Lane Kiffin getting the call back to Rocky Top, but is that even a consideration, or is that just a fun rumor that's getting spread around on Al Gore's internet and we don't have to worry about it much longer?
There's a lot of things on Al Gore's internet, so you never really know. But I'll say this. It was impossible when Philip Fulmer was the athletic director. It was never going to happen, period, when Philip Fulmer was the athletic director. He wouldn't even want to wear like the great jerseys and stuff when Fulmer was athletic director. This was a traditional guy. He was not. He had Tennessee values, those mountain values, and he wasn't going to do it. Now, probably still not likely, but I'm not going to say it's impossible. And I'll say this too. If Lane Kiffin had an offer on the table to be Tennessee's head coach right now, today, he would accept that job. He would. And I think he's happy at Ole Miss. I do. I think he's happy that they gave him a chance to get back in the SEC. And I think he's got nothing but love for the people down there. I just know that it's a huge regret for him that he left Tennessee the way he did. And because the people here really, really, really had his back. Really had his back. And Monty Kiffin, his dad, admitted it pretty quickly that they made a mistake. Lane didn't really admit it publicly for a while because why would he? But now I think he's been more honest and candid about, I made a mistake there. And this is Ole Miss is a good program. You can win at Ole Miss. There's no question you can win at Ole Miss. In an ideal world, all things being equal, you can win more at Tennessee. It's a bigger market. It has more tradition. It has more history. It's a top still after kicking its own backside for a dozen years and just ruining its program at times. Tennessee's still, I believe, one of the 10 winningest programs in FBS history. Still. So, or right there, at least on the cusp. So, It's got, 6 claimed national championships, 2 that are unquestioned, a lot of SEC titles. I think only Bama maybe has more. There's history, 125 years of it or plus shows you can win more at Tennessee if all things are equal. But the question is, would Tennessee go that route? I don't know. It would be a stretch for me, but it wouldn't be impossible. And I think Lane Kiffin, if he could, he would be back.
Does Lane Kiffin even make the short list of White's coaching search?
I would be surprised if he's not on the list somewhere at some point. I don't know yet. Danny White got hired yesterday.
Right.
And we just spoke to him for the first time 2 hours ago, roughly, or two, something like that. So I can't tell you yet for sure exactly where things are on their list. But I can tell you this. If Lane Kiffin didn't have a history at Tennessee, he checks every box for what they're looking for right now. Because except for possibly you could say some integrity stuff, although, programs have been hit harder than his was at times. So I don't know that that's an absolute deal breaker. But Tennessee wants an offensive-minded head coach because Tennessee looks at this era of football. Danny White sees this and says, you got to score a lot of points to win. And Tennessee just has not been explosive on offense for a few years now. And so that's something that they want to do. And plus, you look at every hire Danny White's ever made. Now, none of them were made at Tennessee. They were made at Buffalo and UCF and places like that. But he always went with an offensive-minded head coach. And I think that's what he's going to do now. Plus, Pruitt was a defensive-minded head coach. Didn't work out great. History shows you usually go the opposite way after that. So I know Tennessee wants some positive energy. Tennessee wants a guy who understands kids in the way they think these days, I believe. And that doesn't mean that they wouldn't hire an older candidate because I think they would if the right one popped up. But I think Tennessee is willing to spend money, and a lot of it, if the right candidate's out there. I think they know the position they're in. and I think they want to get out of it. And so do I think Kiffin would be on the list somewhere? Yeah, somewhere on the list. I don't know. I'm still trying to work out candidly who's on what order on that list.
Right.
But he checks the boxes of a lot of the things they're looking for. It's just that if you could make his name Blaine Kiffin, and you'd be like, hey man, look at that. That's the kind of guy we want here. So yeah, I mean, it's I can see it.
What about some names on that list that might be ahead of him? I know you said you didn't really have an order, but if you had to guess, what are some other names that might be on that list?
I'll tell you what's interesting to me is that Tony Elliott's name has come up a little bit today. And that doesn't shock me necessarily, but I know Tennessee has preferred or everything I've heard suggested they want a sitting head coach.
Right.
So because Pruitt had never been a head coach, and I just everything I said earlier about being in this market as a first-time head coach and how dangerous that is, I just don't know that that's the route you want to go right now. And for all I know, they could hire a guy who's never been a head coach. He comes to Tennessee. He's winning a national championship in 3 years. I don't know. I don't know. I'd be lying if I said I did. I'm not one of these guys who says this is going to happen exactly like this and that's going to happen. I don't know. I don't. But I think that that name being on the list surprised me a little bit. It did. Now there's some others out there. Like if you want to talk about home run people that you call and just kick the tires and see why not. I mean, James Franklin's a guy you could call. Just see. Matt Campbell's buyout is a lot.
Yes.
But, do you consider that? If you're willing to spend money, and I've heard Tennessee will pay $7-8 million if they get the right candidate. Now, that doesn't mean anybody's going to get that. But if they're willing to pay the AD, even though they're paying Fulmer's buyout for $450K for the next 3 years, they're still paying an AD $1.8 million plus a $2.5 million buyout. So they're emptying out the couch cushions. I mean, they're doing it despite losing $40+ million in revenue this year and not having one of the biggest reserve funds in the league after all the buyouts in the past 12 years. They still want to go serious on this. And so you can look at candidates up there near the list. I mean, and if it gets lower, I mean, guys like Sonny Dykes could be in play. Certainly, I think it would be a tough sell in some ways. But Chadwell down there at Coastal Carolina, he's a guy who grew up just down the road from here, and he would probably walk on hot coals to get this job. But are you ready to, for a guy who's never played Power 5 football, never been an assistant in Power 5 football, never been a head coach in Power 5 football, and has one good year at Coastal Carolina? That's a big ask. That's a big ask. That's a huge leap forward. Doesn't mean he can't do it, but it would be tough to do that. I think it'd be awkward because Kevin Steele's on the staff now, but Gus Malzahn, or as I like to call him, Hugh Freeze without the baggage, basically. I mean, that's a guy who, if I were Tennessee, people said this when Rick Barnes was hired at Tennessee. They said, he so many times at Texas came just short of being great, and I said, if he did at Tennessee what he did at Texas, he'd be one of the best coaches in program history. Why are you knocking that? Look at what Gus Malzahn did at Auburn. If you're Tennessee right now and he could do that at Tennessee, that would at least set you up for a better future. So, yeah, I mean, I'd consider it. The problem is Steele's there, and that could be really, really awkward. So I don't know how that all would work out. But, I think Scott Frost is a guy you could call just to see. He's at his alma mater now, but he's worked with Danny White before. They won big together before. They trust each other. So that would be a guy. And then maybe someone like Heupel could be down there with Dykes and one of those kind of guys and get a call. But basically, I'm looking at right now a good 12, 15 names. And I don't like being at that point, but, they just hired an AD. So we're all scrambling right now. My phone buzzes constantly right now.
Yeah.
Well, you just answered my next question. I was going to ask you about Gus Malzahn. But my last question.
Sorry about that.
You're good, man. You're good. But my last question for you is this. Sitting here right now, if you had to just make a guess, who do you ultimately think Tennessee would actually hire at this point?
If you asked me 24 hours from now, I could probably give you a legitimate guess on that. But right now, I feel like that would be just a lot of speculation, and I don't want to give someone a raise for no reason.
Right.
I feel like there are guys around the country like Jay Wright in basketball and Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State who have made a killing off of getting raises because Tennessee was interested in them more than one time. They've gotten raises every time. They get raises every time Tennessee has a vacancy, every time. And, Gundy talking about, meeting him in Dallas last time and he's let him down the aisle a couple of times and then walked away. I don't have a good feeling for it yet. And if we were honestly recording this tonight, I feel like maybe I'd have a better answer for you. But right now, sitting here Friday afternoon, after just talking to Danny White for the first time, trying to call people around the country, I don't really know. What I can tell you is that they'd like an offensive-minded head coach. They would like a guy who's got some good energy, a guy who is offensive-minded, has Power 5 head coaching experience, and that's what I can tell you. And that they will spend big if they get the right guy. So there are big targets out there you could look at and say, if it's, hey, but you also need to know that Danny White, when he was at UCF, or he was at Buffalo, I'm sorry, he hired a D3 coach. Now, he was a D3 coach at Wisconsin Whitewater. And if you don't know that, Wisconsin Whitewater, that's a dominant D3 program. He had won 6 national titles and 5 in a 6-year stretch. But still, he went up from D3 to D1 when Buffalo hired him, Lance Leipold. And people are going, that's a big step up. How will that work out? And what does the guy do after a couple of rebuilding years? He's won 2 MAC East championships, and he's got Buffalo in the top 25 this year. So he will not be afraid to go outside the box. Now, he's never had the bargaining power of a place like Tennessee, but Tennessee's also searching at a time where the NCAA is going to be giving some sanctions. And we don't know what they are exactly, but they're going to be some sanctions. So they're going to have to contend with that, and coaches are going to want to know about that very obviously. And you can probably pay them a little more because of that. You can offer a guaranteed year on the deal for every year that there's probation on the front end. There's ways that you can work around that, but that's the situation they're going to be in.
Stephen, who did we have on the show earlier this week that said it would probably be sometime in February before?
Chris Lowe.
Yeah, Chris Lowe. We had Chris Lowe on the show earlier this week. Thank you, Stephen. The wonderful and very talented Chris Lowe.
Chris is one of the best in the business, man.
Yes, very much so. We had Chris on the show earlier this week, and Chris mentioned that, it's probably going to be sometime like middle of February before we get a head coach here at Tennessee. And that really kind of set me back of the timeline. But I do understand of trying to find an AD. Well, it seems like you guys went to the express line and got an AD really fast. You got a phenomenal one. I don't think that was a home run. That was a grand slam hire, bringing in White. So are we seeing someone maybe named here before the end of the month?
Oh, I think it could be by the middle of next week, maybe. I mean, it could even be something like that. I mean, I think this could, Tennessee went out and surprised a lot of us because we've heard things before about, we'd like to move quick if we could, but, it's Tennessee, and Tennessee searches have dragged on and been miserable. I know because I've covered a lot of them. Look how old I look at 38. But, I think this was a surgical strike to get a guy that they targeted at the very top of their list and a guy they wanted and went and got. Boom, boom, boom. Even Danny White said, I was kind of floored. They made that offer, and I was like, whoa, okay, this is serious. And they're like, we want you to come right now. And he said, okay, I can't turn that down. So if they're going to be that serious about the head coaching search in football, which would be a good idea because I think half the team went in the portal a couple of days ago. So you might want to go ahead and get a new coach as soon as you could. Now, you don't want to rush it and get the wrong hire, but I think as soon as you feel comfortable, you need to go ahead and pull the trigger because you need to keep this roster together because this SEC, I mean, you got 85 scholarships, and I know next year will be different because you got the carryover with guys who can be seniors again. But Tennessee's had depth issues for years trying to rebuild programs and get where you can, in the second half, not be run over at times, frankly. So you need to build depth. You need to get a new head coach in so you can get his strength program in there and get the guys learning what kind of offense and defense they're going to be running. There's a lot going on there. So I'm not saying, what's that old John Wooden line? Be quick, but don't hurry.
Right.
That I'd be quick, but don't hurry.
Wes, let me ask you this. What are some names that will not be considered for this coaching job? I know we already asked you what some names, but what are some guys that we don't even have to worry about, the regular old names that always be for these jobs?
I've not heard Gundy's name this time. No, watch this be the time they hired him out of nowhere. My God, that would be hilarious. I wonder in the back of my head if this is going to be sort of like, the Harsin deal was at Auburn, where everybody feels like they're on the trail and they know what they're doing. And then it comes out at the end. There's a lot of good reporters down there, but they were way off.
Yeah.
And I've been there where you're like, wait, what? Where'd that come from? I'd like to think about 3/4 more of the time. I got a pretty good beat on where a search is going. But then there's that other time where you just like, man, the search firm, they really kept things under wraps there. And I think this maybe could be one of those times. We'll see. But, I don't think Hugh Freeze is going to be a factor. I could be wrong, but I don't think he's going to be a factor. But there are some other guys out there. I don't think Gundy will be a factor. I don't know. I mean, you got some other guys that are, would they kick the tires with someone like Cristobal? Would they kick the tires with, someone like a Satterfield? There are names out there. We're going to be a little bit surprised, I think, when we hear some of this stuff. But like you said, it's a good time to talk Tennessee because there's a lot going on, but it's also a bad time to talk Tennessee because we're all searching right now. We're just now getting used to these new people who just got here, and we're trying to figure out where they're going.
Yes.
Wes, here's a question. When me and Peyton Manning are the same age, when I was a student in college, Tennessee had the highest payroll of anyone in college football, and they bragged about that. And of course, their facilities were top notch at the time, way back in the 1900s. But with that being said, Tennessee has not necessarily been a team that's really dominated in the SEC as far as having the highest paid coaching staff. Are we looking just what we saw with White being AD and all the money thrown to him? A lot of people are saying, hey, we're not coming to Tennessee. They're not going to get a good coach because of the NCAA sanctions. Is it going to be one of those things where Tennessee's like, oh, yeah, we're going to get a great coach and we're going to throw $8 million at him and we're going to have the highest paid staff in the SEC? Are we looking at that kind of situation?
It could be. If like I said, if they get the right hire and it's the guy that they are like, man, it's this guy, they wouldn't. I don't think right now they'd be afraid to do that, which is different because Tennessee's traditional model over the years is Tennessee has no problem paying you to be one of the highest paid coaches in the country, but they don't usually do it on the front end. Tennessee's traditional model has been to get kind of a good mid-grade, upper tier, but not top tier hire financially. And then if that person wins, then they make them one of the highest paid in the country. That's sort of been what Tennessee's done historically. But there's a new sheriff in town. So I don't know if things – could they be different now? I think they just in a statement by paying – and I don't know this for sure because there are some private schools where I don't really know exactly. But I believe Danny White's the fourth highest paid athletic director in the college game right now. And Tennessee's staff – Jeremy Pruitt wasn't one of the highest paid coaches in the country, but Tennessee had some really high paid coordinators and some really high paid assistants. So Tennessee's staff was still pretty well compensated. So I don't think they're afraid to do that. I think that they believe they're trying to not pay Pruitt a penny for his buyout. I kind of find that hard to believe. I think they'll probably reach a settlement at some point. I think the lawyers from both sides will want to keep that stuff quiet. But I think they'll have a settlement there eventually. That's just my guess. But that frees up some money to do some other things. So, yeah, I think if they get the right candidate, I don't think they're, going to be – I don't think they wouldn't break the bank. They were going to have to pay Gundy a lot last time, and they were going to get him. They felt like they had a chance. But then when they ended up going a different direction, obviously you're not going to pay Jeremy Pruitt what you're going to pay Mike Gundy because his market value wasn't the same. So if market value dictates they do that, I think they do that.
Wow. Hey, I asked Chris Lowe this question the other day. I love Chris's response. Why McDonald's? Why McDonald's bags? Is there a big-time UT alum or a booster that owns all the franchises there in the Knoxville area? Why McDonald's? And Chris answered it simply. He goes, I can't answer much about McDonald's except they got the best fries. But why?
Yeah, I would love to make a lot of jokes about that, and I've made some. Don't get me wrong, I've made some. But I'll say this. That's the one story that's come out through this whole thing that has been completely and angrily refuted by Tennessee. including, and I won't say who it was because there's no point in that, but one of the 10 people Tennessee fired on Monday told me that there's going to be some bad stuff coming out about this story at some point that's going to be true, but this part of it is not true.
Oh,
They
wow.
have insisted, like, and this is one of the people who got fired who even said, I'm not going to use the word he used, let's just say BS. They were not happy. And I had random people from Tennessee's administration calling me or texting me to say, hey, that allegation is false. So a lot of people in Tennessee, I think there's going to be some ugliness that comes from this, obviously, but it's interesting to me that that's the one story they're flat out saying is not true. So I think the jokes are funny. Why not at this point? Laugh a little bit, but that's the one thing they're saying it didn't happen. So I'll feel like I'll be kinder to them there.
There you go. The record has been set straight. Wes, will you join us here in the near future in the next couple of weeks and touch base with us and let us know how everything's been going?
Sure, anytime. There's a lot going on right now because there's a search for a football coach. You got a top 6 basketball team, that's playing. You got all kinds of stuff going on right now. But my wife and dog probably would like to see me a little bit more. But that's all right. Actually, they probably don't. If I'm being honest, at least she doesn't. But I'm always available. I'll put it that way. I'm always here. I don't look pretty, but I'm always here.
Hey, Wesley, I'm going to leave you with a fun question. I'm a Mississippi State grad. The last coaching hire, it was been heavily reported by Steve Robertson and others with 247 Sports that Dan had basically agreed in principle to become Tennessee's head coach when he was at Mississippi State. And then the Florida job came open, and it was a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am kind of deal. And Dan's in Gainesville. He left Starkville.
100% true.
Yeah.
Yes, that is 100% true. Dan Mullen they were basically walking down the altar. They were about to exchange rings and kiss. And then Florida calls, and he said, wait a minute, hold on.
Wow.
And he was like, Tennessee's a great job, but Florida's a top 3 job probably nationally. I'm going to go do that instead. And then he kind of ghosted Tennessee a little bit. So, but that's the business,
Right.
That's, hey, if you're Mississippi State, and Tennessee calls, you might take the job.
Yeah.
But if you're Mississippi State and you're about to take the Tennessee job and then Florida calls and you haven't signed the paperwork yet, a lot of times you're going to go to Florida. So, I don't – yeah, but I know Steve and others have said that. I've reported it too at the time. It's 100% true. Dan Mullen was all but here.
That chain of events left Tennessee with basically a new athletic director, a new president. You hired Jeremy Pruitt. What was the process like last time? Why did Tennessee settle? And I hate to use the word settle, but I am going to use it. Why did Tennessee settle on Pruitt? Even Mississippi State turned down Jeremy Pruitt to hire.
That's interesting. That's interesting because I heard it the other way around. I heard that Mississippi State wanted Pruitt, and that he ultimately got convinced out of taking the job. So I guess we never really know how that's going to turn out.
Right.
But that's interesting that you put it that way because I've heard it the other way. But, hey, people, the bass that people caught gets bigger every time we talk about it. So, I get it. I get it. But I think you have to go back to Sandy of that whole thing, because you had Mullen taking the job and then he backs out at the last minute because Florida calls and you go, oh, no, what are we doing now? And then you go and, you try to get Schiano, and you have that basically all but done. And then fans just go absolutely ape. And then some boosters start going ape. And then you have to go, oh, no, you're backing out of that. And then you've got a lot of people asking the athletic director, what in the world are you doing? And then you got an athletic director who tries to go rogue, flies not on the university's dime, but on his own dime to the West Coast and makes an agreement with Mike Leach to be the head coach. Right. And then you have people going, no. We did not authorize that. You're not hiring him. As a matter of fact, you're fired. And then you have an athletic director search in the middle of your football search. So then you have to go get a new athletic director. Right. And then they get Fulmer. They stay in-house. They go with Papa Bear. And then he goes and he's got to make a hire pretty quickly. And it came down to – because at that point they had a vacancy for like a month. I mean, you just can't do that.
Right.
So that they had a final 3 of Kevin Steele, Mel Tucker, and Pruitt. And a lot of people thought Steele was going to get the job, but you had a couple of prominent boosters and Fulmer who thought it should be Pruitt. And those people won that debate, and they went with Pruitt. I mean, Pruitt, if you had to hire an assistant at that point in time, Pruitt was the guy, I think. If you had to hire a guy who had not been a head coach, but you wanted the best resume of any non-head coach in the country at that point, I mean, Pruitt still has a drawer full of national title rings. You know,
Right.
he'd done nothing but win everywhere he'd ever been. You know, Florida State national title, Bama national titles, Georgia SEC title. You know, just a lot of stuff that he had done. And so at the time, I felt like it was a fine hire for them. And I'm not convinced he wouldn't have gotten things straightened out in the long run. I'm not convinced. I'm still not. Because I think the guy, they handled this year really poorly, and he admitted that. But I saw enough last year to think, you know what, they'd have a chance here. You know, if they could be patient, which of course they could not. And then of course you had the recruiting allegations, and you know a lot of those are going to end up being proven true. And so you feel like you got to go a different direction. So I don't know if they were settling as much as I felt like at the time they thought they were kind of pulling a rabbit out of the hat, and it just didn't work out that way.
Right. You know, this will be my short follow-up. Kevin Steele. Are they going to handcuff the new head coach saying, hey, you got to keep Kevin Steele on staff? Or is Kevin even considered for the head coaching gig?
I mean, I think he and Danny White will talk, obviously. You know, I mean, now he is a defensive guy.
Right.
So that's a bad start for what Danny White normally hires. But, yeah, I mean, you've got Steele, who's a Tennessee alum, you know, one of those VFL guys. And one of the, you know, I think a lot of people think one of the better defensive coordinators in the country. And a guy who, if you can have on your staff, you would love to have on your staff. But will the new coach want him there? I don't know if it's like a you got to do it thing. He's got a 2-year deal, and Tennessee's only paying him $450K or so because Auburn's paying him $2 million. So that's a pretty good assistant to keep for $450,000 if you could. But will that end up happening? To me, that depends entirely on who they hire, and if there's a relationship there and if Steele's comfortable with it.
Gotcha. Wes, I commend you of being a man of high character. I know we just met today, but most guys come on our show and cuss. You never did. You sanctioned and censored yourself, so hats off to you, brother.
You know, which is interesting because I am a foul-mouthed guy. Anyone who knows me, but you know, I had a radio show here for a while until there were too many things I was doing. I couldn't do it anymore. We have our podcast that comes out all the time. And so I've learned, you know, I do TV stuff all, you know, town and other Fine Bomb and other things like that. And so you learn to get that stuff out of your system. But I'll put it this way. My dad is a contractor named Rawhide. So how do you think I would normally speak? That probably should answer your question. I went to, my parents were fortunate enough to send me to private schools, but there are farms on both sides of my family, and we are unapologetically hillbillies. So I have learned to not say things publicly that I shouldn't say.
Hey, is Bud Ford still with the university?
He is basically a historian. He is good old Harris T. Bud Ford. Love him. He's still around the facility quite a bit. Now he's not in a full-time capacity anymore, but he's still a historian, still does some stuff with the Ball Radio Network. Bud's a lifer, man. They're going to have to – but Bud's only going to leave Tennessee in a coffin, and I hope it's not anytime soon.
I hear you. Hey, before we head out, we usually do storytelling. We haven't done any storytelling. Give us your best John Ward story.
Oh, man, I wish I had – because, see, he got there – I'm old, right? Like I'm an old 38. I've been doing this since I was like 17 years old. But I got on the beat officially after John Ward had been gone for like a year and a half. So for me, it's been Bob Kesling the whole way. It has been the voice of the Vols the whole time. And I'm trying to remember, if I thought about this ahead of time, I probably could have thought of a good John Ward story.
We'll change it. Bob Kesling.
Well, no, he had nicknames. He had nicknames for people that. And he just never forgot anything, John Ward. I can tell you that. He remembered things. His recall was just like things he remembered all the time, was just a consummate pro. I'll say this about Bob Kesling. Bob Kesling can tell you a joke that will have you laughing for like a 24-hour period. And he doesn't do it very often, but Bob will pop up. And for the sake of Bob, I would see if he would want to tell them before I relay them in his stead. But I'll say this about Bob Kesling. That dude can make you laugh out of nowhere, and And I can also tell you that I will tell you this: Derek Dooley's the most creative cusser I've ever heard in my life.
Wow.
I can tell you that much. Derek Dooley, when he would get angry, would come up with words that I will never, ever, ever probably share publicly. But he was able to string words together that I knew all those words, but I didn't know they went together like that. And like there was one day one of his punters hit a ball, and this is a guy, Dard, who ended up going pro. I mean, Tennessee's punter U, right? Even when they've been bad, they have a great punter every year, and he always goes to the NFL. They got like 3 or 4 of them, whatever it is now. They're still in the league. But he hit one so bad off the side of his foot that it went over, out off the field, over the fence, and down the street, down like the hill toward the baseball stadium. And he went on a tangent at every specialist for the next probably 2 to 3 minutes. That was the hardest I've ever come to wetting myself in public because I was fighting laughter so hard. And it was one of the practice periods we were out there.
Right.
And I will never, ever, ever forget that. But I think my best story ever actually comes from 20 plus years of doing this. I've covered Tennessee for all but 2 years. And for a couple of those years, I covered an FCS team early in my career. And there was a coach there who had the funniest quote that I've ever heard from a coach in my life. Because FCS, it's not like, Tennessee, Bama, all these places, you get to see a couple minutes a week, right? That's what you get. You get nothing else. The FCS, I could basically go stand in the huddle if I wanted to. I'm the only guy there. So I'm basically there every day, just kind of a fly in the ointment all the time. And a player and his coach got into a pretty big argument on the field. The kind of stuff that normally happens when we're nowhere near it.
Right.
And I let it go because he finished the practice or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's strange. I thought he'd been kicked off already. But I come back the next day and he's not there. And I'll slightly break my cussing rule one time for this story. I asked this coach, where is John Doe? I won't say the player's name. I said, where's John Doe? And he said, he ain't here. I said, well, I know he ain't here. Why ain't he here? He said, he's got an ass problem. And I said, like hemorrhoids? He goes, no. I kicked his ass, and he didn't like it. He ain't here no more.
Wow.
That was to this day, that was one of the this was the same coach who one day when he saw me, jogging out near their practice facility, because it's kind of near their downtown.
Right.
And I was out jogging, which I used to do before I, I had a stroke years ago and, don't feel half my body anymore. So I can play golf and do other things, but I'm not running anymore, obviously. And so he saw me running, he passed me, and he went, I didn't know your fat ass could run. I said, I didn't know your fat ass could read. So here we are. And so, yeah, that guy, if he had ever become a head coach at a big place, it would have been just this guy was he could be Mike Leach ridiculous. I enjoyed covering that dude. Rodney Allison, former Heisman Trophy winner. He's a funny guy. And Derek Dooley was like that too. We used to argue politics all the time. He's the only coach I've ever covered who was completely comfortable talking about any subject at any time.
Wow.
And he's, as to this day, he's not the best head coach I've ever covered, but he is the smartest football coach I've ever covered. David Cook was up there too. But Dooley's a law school graduate, and he had he passed the bar or whatever. He'd done all that, and so he found out one day. I won't get into specifics, but he found out one day that he and I had different politics because we were talking off the record one day, and he used to bring me into his office sometimes just to argue with me about that. And so it didn't have nothing to do with football. But, it was interesting because I don't know how many football coaches I've ever covered that would sit there and quote Shakespeare for want of a nail to players during he's talking to them about this, and these guys are like, what is he talking about? Right. So, yeah, like that old Family Guy skit said, I've seen some things and some stuff. over the years.
We're running short on time. I've got a Bob Kesselin story that I will save for you the next time we come on. But Bob and we worked together with Jefferson Pilot one time years ago, and I have many stories. And he ended up giving me his rental car at the end of the night. So yeah, I'll share that with the next time you come on.
I'm all ears, man. I'm all ears. I like a good story. Next time, if I'd known that, I would have thought beforehand. I've also slept probably like 8 hours this whole week. So next time I'll try to come with some. I'll think of some better stories.
All right, Wes.
Wes, look, man, thank you for joining us. We hope we haven't taken up too much of your time, and we've got you up full screen. Tell people how they can follow you and how they can listen to your podcast.
Well, the podcast is the Go Vols 24/7 podcast. You can get that. I say anywhere you can cast a fine pod, you can find the Go Vols 24/7 podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Stitcher, all of those and more. You can also go to Twitter, twitter.com/GoVols247, Facebook.com/GoVols247. And you can find me at twitter.com/WesRucker247, just at WesRucker247. Or if you want to go to the best site on all of Alcor's internets to talk Tennessee athletics, you can go to GoVols247.com, where we've got usually more than, we're cranking out 24 stories most days. So we got tons of stuff there.
All right, Wes, get you some sleep, brother. And hey, thank you so much for coming on. I heavily look forward to you coming back.
No problem. I'll get some sleep tonight, but after this, I got another TV hit, a couple radio hits, and then finish a couple stories, and then sleep later. But it's on the itinerary.
Yes. Thank you so much, Wes, and have a great weekend, my friend.
No problem. Anytime, guys.
All right. All right, man. Well, that, of course, was Wes, and we really appreciate him coming on.
Yes.
And that was an awesome interview talking a lot about Tennessee.
Yeah, I did not think we would have Wes for that long. Bob Kesselin, the voice of the Vols. I worked with him once, and he is one of the most funniest individuals. And I'll tell you this, it doesn't really have anything pertaining to my story. I remember just a couple of years ago, I was in the car with my wife. I had to take her to some conference somewhere down in Jackson, Mississippi, outside of Jackson. And I was just trying to find a game on the radio. And I found a Tennessee game, and Tennessee is getting just plummeted that game. And they were talking about the ball was kicked off, and he says, he returned it 54 yards. This is getting embarrassing. And Bob Kessel's like, well, it's better than the touchdown than the last kickoff we kicked to him. And so, Kesselin's always got a wisecrack in him. He might be the Bob Uecker of the SEC now. I don't know. That's a pretty hefty honor to be in the same sentence as Bob Uecker, but Bob Kesselin is a very funny individual. And maybe we can get him on the show here when things die down. Steven, I guess we lost you.
No, you didn't lose me. I'm setting up the thing in the back. Just keep talking.
Well, since Steven's not here, our next guest will be coming up here shortly. We're going to go to the West Coast. And for some of you hip-hoppers out there, that's the left coast. We're going to try to get somebody on. We're going to talk a little bit about the PAC. They've got a new athletic director coming in. That's a huge situation. A new conference commissioner coming in. That's a huge situation that's coming up. And we're going to get some feedback on that. And right now, let's check in on.
Hey, man, I'm here. So I do not know where Heath went, but I am back. And Heath popped up. Okay, so Heath, I'm here, bud.
Okay, there you are.
I had to take the Tennessee down back there and get ready for our next guest.
I didn't know what happened to you. I was like, oh, we've lost Steven. Technical difficulties are off.
No. All right. So without further ado, let's go now to our Pac-12 guy. This guy is a editor for Devil's Digest on Twitter, and his name is Hode Rubino. Hopefully I said that correctly. But without further ado, let's go ahead and talk with him about the Pac-12 issue with them releasing Larry Scott. Hode, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Stephen and Heath. And yes, you did pronounce it correctly. And yes, the Pac-12 did do the correct move in not extending the contract of Commissioner Larry Scott and having him depart some 12 months ahead of schedule. So let's talk about the mess that is the Pac-12.
Okay.
All right. Well, in your words, why was Larry Scott let go, and why was it such a good reason to let him go from the Pac-12?
Wow, where do I even start?
You can make as many jokes as you want.
I think maybe the real short answer would be lack of return on investment.
Okay.
Believe it or not, Larry Scott makes some $3 million more than the SEC commissioner.
Wow.
And it would be a gross apples to oranges comparison to look at what the teams in the SEC get out of a competent commissioner versus what the Pac-12 teams don't get out of a very incompetent commissioner. So if you're going to make Larry Scott one of the highest paid Power 5 commissioners in all of college sports, you better darn well get some return for your investment. And when you're talking about the gaffe that is the Pac-12 network, which the distribution of it is absolutely pitiful, and that's probably putting it kindly. When you talk about an ongoing officiating problem in both football and basketball, your most two high visible sports, when you have a head of officiating in the Pac-12 up until a couple of months ago that had minimal at best experience as an official, whether in football or basketball. When you talk about a commissioner that gets a $1.9 million interest-free loan, which we only found out a few hours ago he will pay back as part of his departure gift, I guess, to the conference. Basically, just talking about a Power 5 conference that has been a laughing stock compared to the other four conferences. This is a change that was due, quite frankly, 2-3 years ago. And thank goodness that the Pac-12 presidents have come to their senses and really trying to cut bait early rather than later. And again, a commissioner that really had a contract that went well into the 2022 calendar year, has basically ending his term in 5 months, and really not a moment sooner for a conference that is begging to be relevant and is anything but right now.
Talk about that TV package. Why has it been such a disaster on the distribution there with the Pac?
Well, I think it comes to really two reasons. First of all, just Larry Scott dying on that hill and not wanting to sign with DirecTV, which really killed the distribution and the exposure of it. And it's a known fact that when schools, the other Power 5 schools, were recruiting against the Pac-12, that's something that they mentioned early and often to recruits, and especially in football, probably in basketball too. Say, look, I mean, when you talk about mom and dad sitting somewhere 2-3 time zones away and being able or not being able to see Johnny play football or play basketball just because the Pac-12 network has such a pitiful exposure, that is something that really is going to be hung over your head from now until the end of time, until something changes. Then when you have contracts with ESPN and Fox, which aren't necessarily bad contracts money-wise, but it really comes down to two elements. First of all, they know that the lack of passion of the Pac-12 fans in comparison to the SEC, which is really a no-brainer, but even conferences like the Big Ten and the Big 12, that is when you can shortchange the Pac-12. When the Pac-12 enters in such a long agreement with ESPN and Fox, where they don't have the wiggle room to negotiate like other Power 5 conferences do, that's something that really hamstrings you. And the Pac-12 teams were lucky to get 50% of what the other Power 5 conferences were getting in TV money, which is absolute lifeblood of those teams. You just have a really, really bad situation when it comes to TV rights, when it comes to exposure overall. The second thing, and this, really is probably going to cause you guys to laugh, and so please don't laugh too hard, but really putting the Olympic sports on the same level as football and basketball and that's really something that really was a death wish for the Pac-12. I mean, you need exposure, and you need exposure to a sport like football, which, aside from basketball, is absolutely the lifeline of all these Olympic sports that now for some reason you're putting on the same tier as football, which is absolutely inexcusable. And look, I mean, I understand that the politics, for lack of a better term, over here on the left coast, as you guys said, is different than other parts of the country. But at some point, common sense has to prevail. And you have to know that, okay, football is the beast that is feeding those Olympic sports. So let's not put them from an exposure standpoint on the Pac-12 networks on the same level as football or a sport like basketball, which is really self-sufficient in comparison. So it really has been just an absolute mess. And I understand that the Pac-12 presidents have some culpability over here. It's not all Larry Scott's doing, but cooler heads have to prevail. Common sense has to prevail at some point. It finally has, but really, in my opinion, 2-3 years, way too late. And again, the Pac-12 just being the laughingstock of the Power 5 conferences is something that has been an ongoing situation, which you hope is now the beginning of the end for a situation that's been really, really bad for this conference.
Let me ask you real quick on a very quick follow-up. What is the distribution average per school get? Because here in the SEC, it's some crazy amount. I always get fascinated by the amount because it grows every year. Stephen, if I'm not mistaken, that amount's like, what, $38 million that each SEC member gets, and it's fixing to go up like another $12 million in the next couple of years due to the new contracts. It's CBS wouldn't pony up enough money to have the game of the week, and ESPN overbid them like 4 times more than what CBS put out, which was a super high bid. But we're looking at each SEC school here in the next couple of years getting like 50 to 55 million a year, which is more than what Notre Dame gets for their national contract. What's the Pac getting per school right now?
Yeah, honestly, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I would say easily a third of that, and that might be really best case scenario if you're talking about a $55 million figure. So, look, I mean, schools really have to be a creative and not really rely on that TV money as much as they want to, and as much as other teams in Power 5 conferences really have the luxury to be. And look, I mean, you have a program like Oregon. They have the sugar daddy and Phil Knight, the CEO of Nike. You have teams like USC and Stanford, which pretty much print out money just because of being private, established schools. But even a school like Arizona State, which enrollment-wise is one of the biggest, if not the biggest in the country, really does need that TV money and really had to be creative. And luckily for them, with some pretty lucrative real estate deals, is able to have some money for the university as a whole, and maybe the athletic department gets a slice of the pie. But when you talk about much smaller programs like Oregon State and Washington State, for them not to have even close to the same amount of money of TV revenue as the other 4 Power 5 conferences really makes them pinch pennies year in and year out. And this is something that hopefully a new Pac-12 commissioner can definitely better the situation, not only for the schools that really need the money, but maybe schools that are middle tier revenue-wise, like Arizona State, for example, that really could use that extra revenue to have the resources as the other Power 5 conferences do. And again, if you want to go back to negative recruiting, that is something that's definitely going to be held over the heads of the Pac-12 programs, unless there's some kind of level playing field over there.
What do you feel like that the Pac-12 needs to do in order to start competing and challenging again for the 4-team playoff, in your opinion?
Well, I think, first of all, just being creative with their exposure. And I think that we started to see some movement towards the streaming exposure, if you will, of the conference. And maybe that's something that is more prevalent here than it is other parts of the country. But I don't think that the streaming has to come at the expense of the quote-unquote old school distribution methods, such as getting the network on the dang direct TV and making sure that every other satellite and major cable company across the country is being able to show that the Pac-12 network. The Pac-12 network thought they were creative in having really 5-6 different Pac-12 networks. They had the central one, and then it would have one that was more focused on the mountain region, on the Colorado and Utah schools, more in the Southwest as the Arizona schools. I think right now they really have to stop with that nonsense and just really have just one Pac-12 network that really is showcasing football and basketball more than the Olympic sports. I'm not saying that you can't really be out there filming Olympic sports, but you can't give them the same level of exposure as football and basketball. That is the beast that is really feeding everybody else, and you have to recognize that. I know it even seems like a ridiculous statement to make because that's a no-brainer to any novice college sports fan out there. But that's another thing that really has to be done. So I would say, again, really just in a nutshell, just exposure and knowing what to showcase more than others when it comes to sports. So those are two things that the Pac-12 has to do, and really ultimately just get a better TV contract out of that. I know it's never going to be at the level of the SEC and even the Big 12, ACC, and the Big 10, but at least get it somewhere in the neighborhood. So maybe now we're talking about 50% less versus 33% less of revenue, because without money, those programs in the Pac-12, well, at least it's to say most of them, are never going to have a snowball chance in hell to compete with their brethren in other Power 5 conferences.
Hold up. I know you probably have never watched our show, but one thing I absolutely hate talking about is the coronavirus. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm done with it. I'm not. It's not that I'm not taking it serious. I'm so tired of it being dominated in conversation and everything else. With that being said, I'm going to break my rule here and talk about the coronavirus. How much did the coronavirus really impact this decision to move on away from Scott as commissioner? And talk about when y'all were told back during the summer that, hey, we're not playing football. We're going to follow the lead of our brethren here up north and the Big Ten, and we're not going to play football this year. What was the response, the reaction from not only the school and players and coaches, because we all know that they ended up winning at the end, but what was that whole fiasco like? And did that send the ball rolling to get Scott pushed out as commissioner of the PAC?
Well, look, I'll preface everything I'm about to say that Scott unfortunately had 10,000 different reasons before this dang pandemic hit for him not being the Pac-12 commissioner beyond June of 2021. So I'll put that right on the table. But in terms of the pandemic, yes, it absolutely did not help matters for Larry Scott and really for the rest of the Pac-12. And look, I mean, I know a lot of folks don't like for politics and sports whatsoever. So
Right.
This is something you can definitely throw back when you talk about the politics of a state like California and really how much it affected the Pac-12. But I think that definitely the pandemic did not help matters. I think the Pac-12 should have handled playing football during a pandemic much better. You really scratch your head, if not frustrated altogether, when you see a state like Alabama being able to have its marquee program at University of Alabama play 13 games. And I'm not sure if Auburn was able or not to play the same number of games, but if they didn't, it's pretty dang close to it. So, I think the pandemic definitely was not the last nail in the coffin when you talk about the tenure of Larry Scott, but certainly did not help matters. And yes, I think the university presidents and the commission of the Pac-12 could have handled matters much better because, again, yes, the pandemic really caused the state of California, for example, to have all these draconian laws. But at the end of the day, the Rams, the Chargers were able to play pretty much without a hitch. And USC, UCLA, Stanford, Cal were not for some reason. And I think the Pac-12, the university presidents, should have pushed much harder against the local government to have maybe not a full Pac-12 season, but maybe even have a 9-game conference-only season, which they wanted to play starting in September 26th. Ultimately, we're not able to, and that just made the irrelevance of the Pac-12 compared to the other Power 5 conferences that much more harsh.
Well, I hope you're okay with this, but I would like to talk about your arch rival school just for a minute, the Sun Devils. Are you surprised at how bad the Kevin Sumlin tenure was there? And were you surprised also that they made a change?
Well, I'll just make a small correction. Arizona State are the Sun Devils. The Arizona are the
Wildcats. I'm sorry. That's my bad.
I'm looking at Stephen like, hey, you got that backwards, Chief.
But that's fine. Look, you guys being SEC guys know that Kevin Sumlin was really a lot of smoke and mirrors back there in College Station. He had Johnny Manziel as the mother of all holdovers, if you will. And once Johnny Manziel was gone, so was the perception that Kevin Sumlin was some kind of elite coach over there at Texas A&M. I really was not surprised. In defense of the University of Arizona, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but Kevin Sumlin was not their first choice for head coach. So
right.
I think that's something that really should, in all fairness, be part of the narrative when you talk about the failure of Sumlin in Tucson. But basically, he learned really quick what everybody knew ahead of time, that recruiting in the city of Tucson is not like recruiting in the city of College Station. And again, you talk about just recruiting in the SEC versus recruiting in the Pac-12. Those are the two different animals altogether. Yeah. And I think Kevin Sumlin deep down knew that was the case. But ultimately, he was not an elite coach. Again, the third choice, if we're being fair over here, for the University of Arizona in their head coaching search some 3 years ago. So, for all those folks that laughed about Arizona State hiring Herm Edwards and not hiring somebody like Kevin Sumlin, I think ultimately the joke is really on you. But with all honesty over here, and I know this is going to sound like hindsight, I wasn't surprised that Kevin Sumlin really had the lack of success that he had in Tucson, because ultimately also comes to the caliber of assistants that you have around you. And I think that Herm Edwards had some great assistant coach hires. Some of them actually moved to be head coaches elsewhere after a couple of years in Tempe. And I think that's another factor that may be overlooked when you talk about the failures of Kevin Sumlin. But again, I think folks like yourself who have the finger of the pulse of the SEC know that Kevin Sumlin was never a great coach over there at Texas A&M once he didn't have Johnny Manziel behind center. So I don't think I should come as a big surprise to see what he has or hasn't accomplished with the University of Arizona in Tucson.
And my last question for you is this. We always hear about the stories about rivalries between Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, Oklahoma. How bitter or nasty is the rivalry between the Sun Devils and the Wildcats?
Well, as nasty as the rivalries are between Alabama and Auburn, Ohio State and Michigan, and rivalries like that, which get a lot more attention just because of which part of the country they're at, I dare you to find one rivalry where one school, University of Arizona, and this is documented in the history books, was actually trying to deny Arizona State from being a full-fledged college, because Arizona State had some very humble beginnings starting out as a teacher's college, okay? There was a statewide proposition, and University of Arizona was lobbying hard, when lobbying wasn't even at the level it is right now, but still trying to prevent Arizona State being a 4-year accredited college at the same level as the University of Arizona. That is why this in-state rivalry, in my opinion, and sure, I mean, you can say I maybe have some bias over here, is the most bitter of any college sports rivalry out there. Because again, Auburn didn't try to deny Alabama from being a university, or vice versa. Ohio State didn't try to deny Michigan from being a 4-year university. But yes, University of Arizona, back in the day, did try to deny Arizona State from being on the same level tier of a university such as them. So yes, this is definitely a very, very bitter rivalry, and also being some 90 miles apart doesn't really help having this rivalry being any civil. So maybe it's the triple-digit temperatures that get to some people over here. It makes them a little hot-headed, but they really have history on their side, because when you talk about your rival trying to deny you being a university, like I said, I don't think any school out there in the country can claim the same level of bitterness and hatefulness when it comes to that.
So, Hode, it felt pretty good to hang 70 on Arizona, correct?
Yeah, I mean that was really watching like a video game. I mean, I was there in person in Tucson, and like, okay, opening kickoff return for a touchdown. Maybe it's a sign for things to come. Man, was it ever a sign of thing to come? And look, both offenses really weren't like lining up the scoreboard up until then, even though they only played 2-3 games each at that point. So I foolishly said in my preview, said, this is gonna be a close game, and I don't see this any of the offenses really lighting up the scoreboard, because they really haven't shown us much up until that week. Oh boy, was I wrong about one school, and it was a school that I covered. But I think when you go back to Kevin Sumlin and his influence or lack thereof of the University of Arizona, those players quit on him, and I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat it or try to spin it any other way. And when your players quit on a coach, that's when you see a 70-7 shellacking.
Oh, my high school baseball coach was on the 1975 College World Series team there at the University of Arizona, and he used to always call you guys the Scum Devils. And we used to needle him because he was our coach and we loved him. But we used to needle him and call the Wildcats the Mildcats. But what are some jokes that Arizona State fans say about Tucson and the University of Arizona?
All right, put you on the spot over here. How do you get a U of A grad to leave your porch? You tip them. So that's one joke that really comes to mind over here. But yeah, I mean, I've heard mild rats, or I heard rats, all together. So yeah, it's a really bit of rivalry. But like I said, again, you don't want to mix politics with sports, but U of A is the one that really fired the opening shot over here, mixing politics with sports, trying to deny Arizona State from ever being a university. So when you talk about the hatred over here, which thank goodness never came to any violent blows over here, just maybe mental violence, if you're going to call it that. But yeah, it's a really bad history. Again, just being the part of the country that they are doesn't get the notoriety of Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Auburn. But nonetheless, trust me, the hatred over here has some deep rooted reasons going back to I believe to the 1960s. I mean, you had the late Frank Kush, the legendary coach that really built this Arizona State program, actually knocking door to door, asking eligible voters for passing this proposition to make Arizona State University. I mean, it's a crazy story, even you talk about something that happened 50-some years ago, but that's really what happened over here over the history between both in-state schools.
Oh, you should write a book about that. I would read it.
Oh yeah, there really have been some books already written and some books that are yet to come. But yeah, it really is fascinating because, I mean, yeah, Alabama hates Auburn, Ohio State hates Michigan, yada yada yada. But to hate to that level, denying the other school from being a university, I mean, that is really next level of hate, at least in my book. So yeah, some really nasty history between both schools, which made that 70-7 score that much sweeter. But since we're less than 24 hours after a bitter 84-82 loss for Arizona State to Arizona here in Tempe, so maybe the basketball program got somewhat of a revenge on a buzzer beater, which was like a putback air ball buzzer beater. I mean, you really don't see many of those. But yeah, but back and forth, those two schools go, depending on the time of the year, having some trash talk material to exchange.
Oh, go on, Stephen.
I was just going to wrap up, so go ahead.
I was going to ask you something very quick. Hold, I don't know how old you are, and I'm not going to ask that, but that Steve Headache Smith, that whole story from way back when. Mm-hmm. If you're not familiar with it,
I am familiar with it.
He was basically a basketball player there at the Arizona State, and he was making bookies a lot of money, or making his friends a lot of money, gambling on the games, and that was a huge thing. And I know that's a blackout for the university, but
Sure.
Touch base a little bit about that whole thing, and what is Headache doing these days?
Yeah, I'm not sure what Headache Smith is doing these days. I know he had some professional career in Europe after he left Arizona State, but
He's a great player.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely was a gifted player, and I mean, that's as much as you don't want politics and college sports to intersect. You really don't want gambling and college sports to intersect to the level that you have players throwing away games. And I'm sure Arizona State is not going to be the last team that's going to be involved in some kind of gambling scandal down the road. It really was a matter of just a starving college student that needed to make a quick buck. And I'm not justifying this by any means. I'm just providing some context over here. So then when there was some, online bookies, which I'm sure they exist to this day on a lot of college campuses, especially the size of Arizona State, when they presented Headache Smith and another player, Isaac Burton, with that opportunity for quick money just to be subtle in throwing away a game, committing a stupid foul, missing some free throws down the stretch, and then making hundreds if not thousands of dollars. That is something that was really too tempting for somebody like Smith or Burton to really turn down. I'm a big proponent. I don't know what your views on this one is. Really to pay a higher stipend for college athletes, because I think that really takes out the temptation of it. And I think the NCAA is going too far. And I know the law is not written in the books yet with this name, image, likeness law, which basically means that any player for Alabama, Ole Miss can do an advertisement for local car dealership and really rake in the thousands. And I think that really creates even a more uneven playing field between schools within a conference and schools between one conference to another. So to me, if you increase that stipend, and we all know these schools do have the money to increase the stipend even just $1,000 more a month to a revenue-producing sport like football, again, going back to my earlier point, to a sport that is nourishing financially the other Olympic sports, which never have and never will make their own revenue, let alone turn in a profit. I think you take away those temptations of gambling. So it's kind of sad we're talking about something that happened, I don't know, some 25 years ago, and we have a landscape right now that's ripe for that to happen again, just because you're not increasing the stipend of a sport that generates so much revenue, that really is the financial sugar daddy, if you will, for all these Olympic sports. And to me, it's really a sad state of affairs. And now when you're taking it to the other extreme, which again, I understand the law is not in the books yet, but could be in a month or 2 or 3, having the name, image, likeness, where now you're talking about football players having the opportunity to make money that maybe other conferences, other smaller school players don't have the opportunity to make. That is really a slippery slope. But I think the NCAA is really sleeping in the bed that it made. You can't make billions out of the NCAA college tournament year in and year out, and not pay the players that are playing for the sports that are revenue generating, or even paying more basketball players, which is a sport that is self-sufficient and not needing the financials of football. So it really is a really sad state of affairs in college football and college basketball, for that matter, that leads you to gambling scandals that happened 25 years ago, and quite frankly can happen right now as we speak, just because the NCAA is making all the wrong moves over here when it comes to fairly compensating those college football players. When you look at the amount of revenue that you generate to the respective schools, it really is a disgusting situation. And too bad it's not changing. And when it is going to change, is just really just shifting the pendulum way over to the other side. And now it's going to open a whole new can of worms in the years to come if that law becomes on the books.
Well, my very last thing, we always tell stories here. What's your favorite on the field, off the field, behind the camera, in the parking lot, Herm Edwards story that you've experienced or that you've heard?
Wow, Herm Edwards stories. I mean, it's pretty much an open book with you play to win the game.
Oh, yeah.
He hasn't been here long enough in Tempe to really top anything like that. But I don't know. This may come off as a self-indulgent story, and maybe some of your viewers hear about his, new catchphrase when he arrived at Tempe in his introductory press conference: "Watch out for them Devils." Well, yours truly was fortunate to ask the first question of his introductory press conference, and introduced myself, Hod Rubino, Devil's Digest. And before I was even able to mutter my dang question, he said, "Devil's Digest, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I cover the team right here in Tempe, Arizona." "Devil's Digest, I'm Catholic. Watch out for them Devils, But you're okay. Go ahead and answer your question. But watch out them Devils." And that became the Herm Edwards "you play to win the game" catchphrase over here at Arizona State. So I guess that's my Herm Edwards story. I mean, again, maybe a little self-indulgent because I was involved with it directly, but it was his introductory press conference. It was his quote-unquote first answer to the beat writers here in Tempe. So that's my Herm Edwards story. But I'll tell you, it's an absolute delight to cover a coach like that, who you could sit down for days and have him tell stories from his NFL days. But really so engaging with the media and with the community, and I think has done a great job over here in Tempe. I know fans maybe being a little restless and want to see a Pac-12 South banner, let alone a Pac-12 championship banner or Rose Bowl banner coming up pretty shortly. But I think it was a great move to Arizona State. And when you talk about the visibility or lack thereof of the Pac-12, I think Herm Edwards, with his visibility, with his mega million personality, able to bring Arizona State much more exposure, much more relevancy. Yes, I mean, win and loss records, banners, championships have to follow that. But I think Herm Edwards has done a great job of making Arizona State that much more visible. I mean, heck, it looks like Arizona State is mentioned on ESPN in one way or another every other week, and that's definitely thanks to somebody like Herm Edwards.
Yeah. Well, my very last thing, I know Steven's going to shoot me here through the screen. Here in the SEC, we are tickled to death about baseball season coming up. There's so much great MLB talent in the SEC this year, and teams are just absolutely loaded with the NCAA.
Well, we lost him, but he wanted to ask you for some reason about the baseball out there. What do you feel about baseball?
Yeah, I mean, baseball is one of those frustrating sports at Arizona State because the last College World Series championship is from the 80s, and you're talking about a school that has huge names in the game like Barry Bonds, Dustin Pedroia, and the number one selection in the last MLB draft is Spencer Torkelson. So this is one sport where I'm not saying the ASU football and basketball fans have much patience, but they definitely don't have any patience when it comes to ASU baseball. They want to see results, and they want to see results right now. And the tenure of their current coach, Tracy Smith, has definitely been a very, very tenuous one. Some really disappointments in postseason play, some of the worst records win-loss wise that we've seen in Tempe ever under his tenure. And during the pandemic, I mean, I know there's a lot of programs that can say, well, would have, could have, should have, would have, because of this pandemic and a lot of missed opportunities for a special year. But Arizona State baseball is definitely one of those sports that can really claim that. And again, I mean, they have the number one selection in all the MLB draft in Spencer Torkelson. It's a team that's getting a lot of love when it comes to the ranking of the recruiting classes. And I think the latest preseason poll that I saw, I have him ranked, I think around number 15, more or less. So expectations are high again when it comes to the ASU baseball program. And you have a coach that legitimately you could say that maybe he is on the hot seat right now if he doesn't produce at a very minimum. a Pac-12 championship, and in some way, somehow needs to find himself to another trip to Omaha. But yeah, it's a sport that a lot of fans are just wanting those glory days to come back, and it's been really an exercise in frustration, no matter who the head coach is. So be interesting to see if ASU baseball can really fulfill the promise and all the accolades they're getting right now in the preseason. But it's really been, like I said, one frustrating season after another for the fans of ASU baseball. Maybe this is the year that they get over the hump, which would be very ironic when you lose an absolute superstar in Spencer Torkelson, who again was the top pick in the MLB draft, and I think could have a really nice career for the Detroit Lions or the Detroit Tigers. Sorry, wrong animal. Or the team that he ends up in MLB down the road. But yeah, it's like I said, one program that fans are really, really anxious to see some kind of results on the diamond.
Well, Hode, look, man, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope we didn't take up too much of your time. And we would love to have you on again to pick your brain about the Pac-12.
No, absolutely. I mean, always nice for the SEC folks to find some time for this conference, which, as I said, has been irrelevant up until now. But yeah, I really appreciate the time. You can follow me at Devil's Digest on Twitter. DevilsDigest.com is the website, and we'll see if 2021 will be turning the page and getting over the hump for the Sun Devil program and its major sports, but also for its new commissioner, which really is going to preside over a crucial year for this conference.
And Hode, I'll leave you with this. Yes, I'm an SEC guy, but I have to say, I am a huge fan of the Pac-12 After Dark games because they usually come on here about 9:30 at night, and they don't get over till about midnight. I am a fan of the Pac-12 After Dark.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, if fine folks like you 2-3 time zones over are going to stay up and watch a dang football game, might as well make it entertaining, right?
Yes, sir.
So, and in the Pac-12, for good or for bad, there really isn't a never a dull moment. And
yes.
Pac-12 After Dark is not hyperbolic. There is some crazy, what stuff that happens, well after the stroke of midnight over there in the Central and Eastern time zones.
Yes. Well, thank you for your time, and we will do it again soon.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Heath. Right. Have a great weekend.
Well, that was a really interesting perspective on the Pac-12. We really want to thank him for joining us. And I tell you what, it's going to be real interesting to see how they move in getting a new commissioner out there in the Pac-12.
It's definitely a story that I am keeping my eye on. And it's going to be interesting to see, because this is a big deal when you hire a conference commissioner. I mean, they're negotiating your television contracts. It could be $2 or $4 million less or more at each school, and that adds up quickly. You're thinking, what's the difference between $54 million and $58 million? It's not that big of a difference. It's a huge difference.
Yes,
especially when you're talking about those Olympic sports that he was talking about. If you look at it, and I won't stay long on this, the Olympic sports out there in the Pac. That's where a lot of your USA team athletes come from. A ton of them. Your swimmers, your divers, your cross-country people, your track people. A lot of those athletes that are on the Olympic team come from those Pac-12 schools. So, it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to do this next commissioner, how they're going to figure this out. But, yeah, basketball has suffered. Baseball has suffered. Football has suffered. All your major sports have been suffering there in the Pac. I mean, look at Arizona. They were a powerhouse in basketball a couple of years ago. And they're still a great team, but they're kind of falling off. And then, you look at a team like Arizona State, have all the talent in the world. And I think they're a mirroring program with Mississippi State. I really do. Right. Because they were a huge, huge powerhouse in the 80s. And they've been to Omaha a bunch over the years, but they've never won it. And so that's, just like Mississippi State. I believe Mississippi State's been, 12, 13 times to Omaha and haven't won it. So, it's kind of a team of that stature and nature.
And if memory serves me correctly, 2000 and 17, Arizona State came into the dude and knocked off Mississippi State in the Super.
You get schools wrong again. You get schools wrong. It was Arizona.
Okay.
Knocked off Mississippi State, and that was one of the best Mississippi State teams I have ever seen. That team could have beaten several of the Omaha Dogs teams of past. And that's the crazy thing about baseball. You hear about Mississippi State fans talk about the '85 team, and they'll tell you that the '84 team would have whooped the '85 team up and down and twice on Sunday. And the '84 team got put out in the regionals. If I'm not mistaken, BYU put them out. So it's crazy to see the sport of baseball when you have such phenomenal teams and they fall a little short, and the teams that are not as good make it to Omaha or win it. And you know what, Stephen? I believe Arizona is one of those teams a couple of years ago.
Yes.
That beat South Carolina in the new stadium there at TD Ameritrade there in Omaha. They talked about their team the year before was one of the best teams in school history. And Arizona's got multiple titles in baseball.
Yes.
And they didn't win it that year, and the very next year, look what happened. They beat South Carolina in the finals and became national champs.
Yes. Well, man, I got to tell you, I'm doing that because we actually have a little birthday that I want to do because he is a loyal, very loyal viewer of the show. He was not able to watch today because I messaged him and no response. But he wished me a happy birthday a few days ago. So I wanted to wish him a happy birthday on the show. It is the birthday today of the very famous up-and-coming comedian Richard Lockhart. So I wanted to go ahead and say happy birthday to you, my friend, and I hope you have many more and a great day for your birthday.
Yeah, Richard usually puts in the funniest comments in our comment section. I always look forward to Richard's comments because they always make me laugh.
Yes.
But yeah, hey, Richard, happy birthday, brother, and thanks for watching.
Absolutely. And I'm actually going to post that on his wall after we get through. I'm going to chop up that little bitty part and post it on his Facebook page for a surprise for Richard there.
Chop it like Chuck Norris, Stephen.
That's right. Chop it up. Here we go. All
hey,
right,
Stephen,
guys.
what did you learn on the show today?
What now?
So what did you learn on the show today?
That the Tennessee has a lot of issues upcoming. Maybe we may get a coach by the middle of next week, if not later. And then, of course, the Pac-12 has got a lot of soul searching to do in order to get back up to where it needs to be on par with the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, and the ACC.
Yeah, the things that I learned that shocked me the most is Lane Kiffin is actually a candidate up there in Knoxville. If you would have told me or asked me today, like, nope, he's not a candidate. He's not going to be considered.
Right.
I don't think Tennessee is going to bury that hatchet. I think they're going to keep the hatchet with the handle sticking out so they can use it. They're not going to hire Lane Kiffin. I was so shocked when Wes said that. Now, he didn't say it was going to be him, but he said that he makes the list and he thinks that he's not off the list. That really, really shocked me.
I actually have to disagree a little bit because just my personal beliefs based off of how we did at USC and then, of course, Florida Atlantic. I actually feel like this guy right here would be a better position and a better coach for Tennessee than Lane Kiffin based off of what he was able to do year in and year out down at Auburn War Eagle. I think Gus Malzahn would be a much better candidate to right the ship up there.
Now, I think if you go as far as coaching and recruiting, I lean toward Lane Kiffin being better than Gus. But as far as running a program in long-term success, I would lean toward Gus. But you know what? If Tennessee got either one of those guys, SEC East, look out. They're coming.
Yes, and that's why, because I think that up-tempo gimmicky offense, you only have to really look at right now. Sorry, guys, but your only opposition over there is going to be Florida and Georgia. Whereas in the West, it was Alabama, LSU, A&M. I mean, it was gauntlet through the gauntlet over there.
Depending on the year, it could have been an Arkansas, Ole Miss, or a State, depending on the year.
And then, of course, Alabama. Over in the East, it would be much easier to win, and I think Gus would be a better candidate right now than Lane Kiffin up there. Just my 2 cents, but yeah, definitely, I think he would be the better candidate up there.
Wow. You know, I was shocked when Chris Lowe told us earlier this week on the show that it was probably mid-February before we have a coach. And then look how quick everything changed. There's an AD that they went to go interview, and they brought him back on the plane.
Yeah, I mean, just boom.
Yeah, and he is working already, and he wants a coach by next week. I mean, that's crazy that you have hired an AD, and not only an AD, a grand slam hire of an AD.
Yes.
And you know, can they follow it up? But it looks like Tennessee is opening up every bank account. And you know, like you said, Wes said, they're getting the money out of the cushions of the couch. They're throwing everything out of this. And when I heard the number $7, $8, maybe $9 million, I was like, you can have any coach they want to. You know, I was thinking you can hire a coach for $5.5 million, which is a super hefty price tag.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I was like, you can hire a coach for $5.5 million, but you got those sanctions coming. You're not going to have anybody looking at your job. And they're going to pay more than the Jacksonville Jaguars did for Urban Meyer to bring in somebody. You can have anybody you want. Urban Meyer might say, hang on, you're going to pay $9 million? You know, I haven't signed this contract with the Jaguars yet.
Right.
You know, I mean, you can get almost anybody for that kind of money. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Tennessee does. And props to Tennessee for actually showing leadership for the first time in a decade and a half.
Absolutely. Well, man, I think that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Stingray Show. On Tuesday, it's actually going to be a Mississippi State show because we actually have 2 Mississippi State people that are going to join us. We are going to have Titus Brown, who was a former DN at Mississippi State. And if you want to win, let Titus spin. We're going to have him on. And then, of course, my co-host over there, he lined up the other guests. So tell who else we're going to have.
We're self-proclaimed. I think I've heard him call himself this. The greatest backup quarterback in Mississippi State history. The one and only Matt Wyatt will join us on the show. Matt was a starter for a while at Mississippi State. He is also known for coming in and having some of the greatest moments in Mississippi State history with the many comebacks that he had. Of course, the famous one against Auburn there. There was one at Kentucky, a Thursday night football game. You know, a very intense game. Matt was part of that great 99 team, those cardiac Bulldogs that brought us the Dog Pound Rock, which is a great fun thing in college football, especially in the SEC. But Matt Wyatt will join us. And Matt just won Mississippi Sportscaster of the Year here recently, here in the last week or two. So Matt working very hard at what he does. He's also the color analyst for Mississippi State football. So Matt's a man of many talents. He has his own show. He does, you can see his vlogs on Facebook and other platforms. But Matt's a super busy guy. And I look forward to having Matt in and telling us some fun stories.
So that's going to be on the Tuesday edition of the show. We hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And as always, God bless. And we'll see you right back here on the Stingray Show on Tuesday.
Enjoy your weekend, Stephen.
You too, man. The Dogs and Stingray are coming for you. This is Stephen Ray, a.k.a. Stingray, coming to you live from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Good afternoon, Mr. Feinbaum. Stingray here, and I'm about to shoot the bull with you like all the Auburn students do down at Auburn. Worst defense ever!
ever!
So without further ado, here is the biggest.
Here we go, guys. Dobbs, back to pass, launching the ball. Jennings, he's got it. Jennings, he's got it. Touchdown, Tennessee. They shocked the Dogs in 7.